take a look at Zoocracy. This is a preview copy I've got, so components might be different. You can look on the Kickstarter for this in order to determine, what the intentions are. But this is kind of a homemade copy. There have been some changes in the rules. I think clarifications and hammering things down, but honestly, from what the designer told me, it doesn't look like there's a lot that's changed. That it's pretty much, pretty close to what I've got written here, which, given that it's a glossy sheet and everything, wouldn't be easy to mark up and change, even if I had a full set of errata for it. And why did I do this? Because I don't usually take Euros on, unless I have gotten so excited about buying them. Well, in this case, it's a political game, and in particular, it's a parliamentary elections game. I don't have a parliamentary elections game which satisfies me. I've got to tell you, one of them, the Marker, which is sort of, I don't know, the granddaddy of the parliamentary type games in terms of being a Euro that's popular and all that, really did not satisfy me, which if you're watching my channel since the beginning or dig back, you would have already realized, you would already know that. Kind of a game I haven't looked back at. Canadian Civil War has its own mechanisms for parliamentary elections, but I don't really like how they work out. Most of the games that I have don't have parliamentary elections, things like Junta or I don't know what else. I have a lot of ones that handle a presidential campaign in the US as well. So let's take a look at what the mechanisms are in play here. And the first thing is the board. Before we actually get to the mechanism, let's take a look at some of the components. Okay, so each player has some action cards assigned to them, which unfortunately are icon based, which I did not realize. So I'm going to have to be doing a lot of looking up in order to play. Maybe I'll get used to them as they go. This is, going to be a multilingual game, so it's understandable that they want to do that. We'll see how much of a pain in the ass it is to understand what these cards mean. Let's take a couple of these as examples. This one says you whip around and turn in a circle as far as I'm concerned. So let's see what that means over here. And I page through this. I don't see it. Maybe it's here. Early parliamentary elections, maybe? Yes, that's this symbol. Great. Okay. And then this other one is two birds, and it turns grain into grain. Negative campaign. Remove any one food token from another party from the indicated animal species and put it back in the general supply. Place one of your food tokens on that species. Okay. I do not find these terribly, the iconography terribly informative. However, each player is going to have their own little player aid, so conceivably you won't have to be sharing the rule book and paging through it all the time. These are event cards. You're going to get one of those each turn coming up, and they're going to kind of, I assume, kind of drive the game a little bit more. I haven't looked through them. I like the surprise factor. This is the deck for the action cards. These are political offices that get handed out, kind of like in Junta. The offices get dealt out to form a coalition. Well, here you're going to have a similar type of situation. You're going to have a situation in this game where you have both a head of state as the president who's elected, as well as a prime minister who's selected from the parliament. So it's more of, I don't know, maybe an Israeli style, or Weimar Republic for that matter, style of parliamentary, rather than, say, the British style with the monarchy holding officially the head of state but no actual power. So the real power is all in the prime minister in terms of even, aligning for diplomacy and stuff like that. So that makes it kind of interesting. Different counters that players have. These are food tokens. They're basically your money in the game. This is your parliamentary seats that you hold, and it'll be tracked along there. This is whether you're for or against a proposition, the government, whatever. These guys over here are basically your victory point markers. Your goal in this game is to get a certain number of agendae completed. Each player has their own political agenda, and it's all completely abstract. It's just points you're getting, you know, at each agenda item you get is a victory point. And the game is over when somebody gets to 10 of these, and they win. Or there's a game end card in the last 4 cards of the deck, which can also trigger a quicker game end, and that'll, the victory will go to whoever has the most there. Time is tracked with these trees, which, as I don't know that they're terribly important, except for the fact that they allow you to keep a number of things in play. So this is the round that you're actually on. This is, I believe, the presidential election, and this is the parliamentary elections. And they both go on different cycles, and they can actually coincide. All right, let's see what happens. And most of the political offices don't seem to have much in the way of a role. Maybe they're based on some of the action cards. I don't know. Or on some of the events. So, for example, the foreign minister may get bonuses from action cards and events. Minister of Defense, bonuses from action cards and events. The Prime Minister, the President, and the opposition party are going to each get their own special roles, but they may also have some additional advantages. In fact, it appears that these two do. Yeah, they all do. So all the political offices can give you some kind of bonuses based on the cards you have. Okay. Let us start looking at the rules. And they're not terribly complex. The setup, everybody gets 10 food and their pieces, and that's about it. Shuffle things up, whatever. The gameplay of the game is going to follow this sequence, but not every turn. So every other turn, there's going to be a presidential election. Now, on the first turn of the game, all these phases are played except for the vote of no confidence, because that can't be played in a turn when a parliamentary election is played. Then you do a parliamentary election campaign and the election itself. Basically, for the campaign, you're going to bribe the different animal groups with food, and then they'll end up voting for you. Based on whoever has the most food in an area will get the higher number of seats, and whoever has the second most will get the second value of seats. There's no tie-breaking rules in this, but you know what? I can come up with some pretty fair ones that probably have been baked into the rules at this point, which is basically, you know, like if 2 people tie for first, they're going to split those 8 votes. You know, if it's 3 people, I start getting more complex. But I'll do it as is reasonable, and that'll give us a chance to look at the game without me having to dig up the PDF of the current rules and try to hunt these things down. Okay, once the elections are completed, you try to form a government, and each player, in order of the number of votes that they've collected, remember from the animals here, gets to make a proposal for what their government is going to be about. And they get to hand out the different political offices, not the opposition, and not the presidency. This is the presidency, I believe. So they get to hand out the 3 titles here, and what are they again? I don't know. They're back here. The foreign minister has, I guess, the cheese. The minister of defense has the swords, and the prime minister gets the tie. Okay. As in necktie. Basically, in order to form a government, you have to get players with votes equal to the majority, equal to or exceeding the majority of the votes that were cast in order to form a government. You make certain promises. You make promises as to which offices you're going to give to whoever, and you're bound by these. You can't renege on that. And you make promises as to who the prime minister is going to allow to achieve an agenda item. But that is at the prime minister's discretion. So there has to be some level of trust in terms of how these are organized, because those can be reneged on. Okay. The next thing you hit is if there is no parliamentary election, there's a potential for a vote of no confidence. This can be triggered. The parliamentary elections happen every third round, so they'd push forward a couple rounds. So the vote of no confidence happens only if the opposition leader says he wants to have one. He can only have one in any parliamentary cycle. And he can't have it the turn the election was cast. So he has 2 turns that he can call it in general. Sometimes they're early elections, right? He has 2 turns he can call it in general, and it basically gives him one chance to form a government in opposition to the current government and just start things all over again with a new set. Then you draw a random event and apply its effects. Okay, then the prime minister chooses a player not bound by the agreements of forming the government, who gets to pass an agenda item, and then you hit the end of the round and move the marker forward, and that'll indicate what gets done in the next round. Anything exciting here? Well, how does the presidential election work? The mechanism for that is a simple bidding mechanism. Each player can take any number of their food tokens, they put them out in a fist, and once everybody's out there, well, I don't like how my aging is going. They reveal, and whoever bid the most wins the presidential election and becomes the president. Which, again, doesn't have a lot of powers, okay? Let's say a couple of people tie. Well, if a couple of people tie, there's one more round of elections where you can bid additional money. First thing that happens is each party returns half of its food tokens in the case of a tie to the bank. And then each player who's in the tie can make a second bid, which in both cases, if you lose the election, you will be paying half your food that you bid. If you win the election, you pay all the food that you bid. And this is important because for the parliamentary elections, you're going to get to play up to 5 of your food tokens. If you win the election and you're the president, you have a special bonus where you're allowed to play 1 extra food token from here that you don't have to spend. So you probably are not going to want to spend more than 5 of your food on the first turn of the game on the presidential election. But it's possible you might be willing to spend 6, so we'll see how we do things there. Because I'm going to be soloing this, I'm going to handle the bidding using some dice to just help me make some decisions. And I'll do it kind of sequentially, and we won't worry too much about the mechanism there. It's just the way I handle things when I do that. And it'll change throughout the game as circumstances change. Okay, if there's 2 ties in a row, the current president stays in office, and if this is the first election of all, no president's elected. And that just means nobody has the special powers that the president may have. After the election, you move the presidential election bow tie 2 spaces forward, and so that'll be the next turn where there's a presidential election. Okay. The president, as soon as he's elected, gets to implement a political goal. Just gets a bonus out of, winning that big election. There's nothing that says the president has to have anything to do with the government, though. And that's kind of important, because the president could also be the government opposition leader. Okay. For the parliamentary elections, Each player in turn order. Now that turn order is going to be whoever has the most seats currently will be going first, and they'll have to distribute their food first for the parliamentary election. And then there's a sequence of tiebreakers here, which is who's in the lead on the political goals track, the prime minister, the foreign minister, defense president, opposition leader. It's possible that all of these are gone or something, you know, whatever. If there's still a tie, you randomly determine who goes first. There should not be. That should be an incredibly rare situation. But anyway, what you get to do is you're allowed to play up to 5 of your food tokens in the different animal spaces. Okay? No more than 3 in any one space. And you've got to keep in mind how many votes given animals have. So, you know, over here, the hippos have 6 and 2. So if you were to win them, you get 6 votes, which clearly makes them the biggest prize. But, you know, maybe it's better to, if you're playing early, to play over here on the polar bears, because even if you only come in second, you get 3 votes. You probably don't want to distribute your 5 food tokens among 5 different animal groups, because then other people, especially early in the game, other people will be able to just top you, you know, and beat you out for first place or whatever. But late in the order, you may well want to play your pieces in, you know, you may be able to get away with getting, say, the 2 votes that the monkeys have for just 1 piece of food or something like that. All right. You're also then able to play action cards that are allowed to be played during this phase. All right. Then we count the actual votes that people have based on who has the majorities in the different areas. And that's settled up on here. And then you determine what the majority is. And then the players start cutting deals. And they can cut whatever deals they want, but they're all promises, nothing else. You're not allowed to exchange food, cards, anything in order to get a deal going. Very different from when to there, right? This also doesn't have a military aspect to it. Okay. For formation of the government, which comes after you have your discussions, the person who has the most votes, as I said, gets to announce a government made up of a few different promises. One is promises for the 3 positions there. Those can all go to one person if you want. You know, so if you have an absolute majority on your own somehow, you can just say, well, I am the government, you know, and take all 3 positions, and also just promise to yourself that you're going to take all the political agenda items. That way you won't piss anyone off, right? But yeah, that's what you have to do. You have to announce which offices you're going to distribute and what the plans for allowing political agendas to be passed by the different members is going to be. The players vote, and they do it secretly by marking this counter. Okay. If they voted yes, if the majority of players voted yes, that government is created. The offices are handed out, and we move on. If that is not acceptable, then that coalition's been declined, and the next highest number of votes gets a chance to form their own coalition. And there's some tiebreaker in here. Eventually, everybody will get, either a government will be accepted, or everybody has gotten one chance to create a government and has failed. The person, if the government is created, the person with the most seats in Parliament who is not part of the government is given the opposition card. Now, I believe the people in government are the people who voted yes. And there's some die breaking in there as well. If no government is created, the party who's the president gets to distribute the political officers however they like. And you have what's called a minority government in that case. Each party gets their offices, and you can make whatever promises you like about who gets to implement the goals. But if you don't have the prime minister, that doesn't really matter. So, you know, unless you have the prime minister agreeing to whatever you're promising, it's probably just bogus. Each party who got an office or got a promise is going to be considered part of the government. And they will be marked with the yes vote, whether or not they like it. The other parties will be the opposition, and their vote markers are marked no. The opposition leader will be allocated just the same as before. And each member, after all the positions, after the government's been formed, and it will always be formed in one way or another, each government member gets one card from the action deck, and each opposition player gets 2 cards from the action deck. So there's an advantage to being in the opposition. Okay. Now, if there's no parliamentary election, there's the possibility for a vote of no confidence. And that's decided just by the opposition player. He decides whether or not he wants to trigger one. If he has triggered one, however, there cannot be another one. And that gets flipped over. His card gets flipped over to the X side to let him know he can't do that again until the next parliamentary election. The way that's done is the opposition player will offer a single coalition using the same rules as before, and there's a vote, and if the proposal is accepted, a whole new government's elected, but the next parliamentary election is still left in the same position it will be, or it was before, and you know, you get to reposition the cabinet ministries, and you get to make new promises if you wish. If the proposal is declined, nothing happens, except that the opposition leader loses his chance to do this again. Okay, the event card, an event is drawn and executed, blah, that's it. Okay, for the political goals, first each party, each player in player order gets to play action cards based on this period, based on this time position. And then the prime minister gets to announce who gets to implement a political goal and get a victory point. If you don't follow the plan, you may be triggering a vote of no confidence on the next turn, but that's up to the players to decide. End of round, nothing too exciting here, I've already talked about it. The timing of the parliamentary and presidential elections is there. And the game over when somebody reaches 10 or when the end of game card is raised. Okay. Let me talk a little bit about my main concern with this at this moment is that there's not much more. There's just this parliamentary election. There's no military stuff going on, nothing like that. And there's very little to hang the framework of the ideologies in play here, which is to say, you're just bribing people right at the moment to join you. You're spending money, you get votes. And that feels a little bit less believable than like playing to their emotions having to do with particular ideologies. I wish, it's obviously not what this game is, but I wish that, I don't know what these are all for, little standees. You could put these cards in them if you really want it. But there are plenty of them, no real need. I wish that there was sort of an association with different ideologies, with different players, which kind of gave them some kind of rationale and some kind of effect for getting their political agendas passed, but they don't really matter. It's just, yep, we succeeded at something, which is, you know, it basically comes down to me to like, yep, I lined my pockets, you know, by distributing food that I've got somehow. What else do we have here? Not much. But anyway, that kind of worries me, is I feel like there should be some kind of link between the agendas that you're passing and some kind of effect on the board. Junta gets around that for the most part by just saying, well, you know, you're trying to gain military power, and some of the things that you do will gain you military power. So it gives you this extra plane to kind of play on. Canadian Civil War has its own whole mechanism for what's going on with the politics there. Other games that have politics in them, well, some of them are just political games, but they're not about winning multiple elections. Most of them that I have are about one election, and they look into some depth in that election in some form or another. So I'm a little worried about this not being, you know, being a little too loose. Republic of Rome, much more complicated game, might be kind of along this line in its derivatives, in the sense that, like, you're not really linked to some kind of goal, you know. If you have the Gracchi brothers, yeah, you're better at passing land reforms, but you may not have any particular reason that you want to do that or use that ability. It doesn't give you much. So you don't really become aligned with the characters in that game in terms of what the desires are. Your desires are to become important, which isn't entirely unreasonable, but, you know, it's similar to this is all I'm saying. There's rules for 2 and 3 player. I was going to play this with my wife, but I decided not to, because looking over these, basically, you wouldn't be forming coalitions generally. The party that has the most seat in Parliament takes the 3 political office cards. The rest are in opposition. And you're really, in 3 players, there might be some interest here, because 2 players could conceivably form a coalition. And this is just kind of like, usually no coalitions are formed. Well, that sounds like the base rules are still in play, so like it's just kind of a suggestion to modify things. But in 2 players, it'll almost certainly fall into something that doesn't even look like an interesting game. So we're just going to go with my playthrough here instead. Let's take a look at some of the action cards. I don't want to be too surprised by them. Negative campaign, we already looked at this. You take a food away from another party and put it in your own. When is this done? It's done in parliamentary election. Are these nicely described on the card when you can do them? Yeah. So you've got time of, and let's see, time of use is the food phase. Okay. Now, there's a rule in the game, or a statement in the rules, which I do not know because I didn't see anything, but I've been kind of troubled by it, which was, let's see, tip, do not bid too many tokens, especially in the first round. You'll need 5 for the upcoming parliamentary election, and you will usually receive food tokens only after a parliamentary election. I'm hoping that'll end up in the cards. There we go. You get food tokens equal to the number of seats in Parliament after a parliamentary election. So there's what I missed. Yeah, I figured I was missing something. Okay, overhang mandate. The party with the most food tokens on a particular species gets 1 seat in Parliament for the current parliamentary election. Okay. And this is played during the election. Let's see, that's this. What was this? Time of use, parliamentary election campaign. Yeah. Loyalty, you're allowed to leave a couple of food markers on a given species after the election, which means you get to keep some of the loyalty of that species. And that's the closest I have to an ideology that I know here. Early parliamentary elections. This is played during the event phase. The parliamentary election marker moves to the next round. Early presidential elections. You get to shift the presidential election forward. And this is played as an event during the event phase. Party donation. Take the indicated number of food tokens from the supply and get them in your party funds. Only if you have the highest number of food tokens on the given species. I assume there's going to be a picture of the species there. Can only be played during event. And these are going to help drive which species you're going to, they're going to be opportunities that allow you to say, maybe I'm not interested in the polar bears just by default. Maybe there's other species I want to be involved in more. Defectors, your party gets the indicated number of seats in Parliament. Any party of your choice loses those seats. That can be really huge in terms of a vote of no confidence. Assertiveness, advance your political goal marker by a step if you have a given office. And this is during implement political. Blockade, you do not implement a political goal announced by the Prime Minister. Other event cards can be played as normal. You have to have a given political office. This is kind of a dicky thing because remember, you joined that coalition with an agreement, probably, that certain opportunities would be played. So this can cause some bad blood in a sense that, it's kind of weird because you're like, well, I have this action card, I'm going to use it. But you are kind of violating the agreement that you walked into in terms of forming the government. So I can see this going both ways where both people involved in it feel like they have a legitimate grievance. The guy who has the card is like, well, I've got this stupid card, I want to take advantage of it. And the guy who's losing the opportunity to play one of these also has a grievance of his own because that's the key way of getting victory points in the game. The event cards themselves, well, all right. Let's not look at these. The only one we really care about is the end of game, but we can see, well, if you have a political office, yeah, well, look, you get some food. You have a political office, you get a political goal marker. No goals are played if a strike is drawn. And these you don't have much control over. They're just going to flip up, and you want to have an office because it might give you something. Winds of change, the opposition gets 3 seats in Parliament. The Prime Minister loses 3 seats. And again, that can cause a vote of no confidence. And then, of course, the end of game where, hey, it's over. All right, that's all there is. I've talked a little bit about where my concerns lie. It may still be fun. Again, just because it's not linked to something that I want to be there, I'm not completely convinced I'm not going to have a good time with it. Because, honestly, none of the parliamentary games that I have, meet all my kind of desires and such. And this one, for being a fairly light game, may cut to the chase of a junta without having to play out all the military aspects. Or, I know the other one, Spice Harvest. Oh, God. Expansion to Dune that has political ramifications to it. But again, you're going for specific goals in that to help you set up Dune, so that's a little different. But yeah, it may be that the clean political, the clean parliamentary model with nothing added to it, and this trivial kind of, I get votes just by buying them, is perfectly reasonable. Something very Roman about that, actually. At least as far as we can tell. But, we'll take a look. Certainly doesn't look like Animal Farm. It's not like, the ideologies competing there or anything along those lines. All right, well, let's send this up, and after dinner, I'll probably start playing.